Then I heard the footsteps. Not one this time. Paced footsteps. 3 or 4 of them. The sound of weight coming down on metal stairs in a deliberate rhythm. A human weight. The sound had that specific quality. The slight flex in the tread before it takes the load. The way the whole structure adjusts a fraction under the pressure. I'd heard that exact sound on the exterior stairs of my old warehouse hundreds of times. I looked at the staircase. Someone was standing on the second landing. They were facing mostly away, angled toward the tree line, wearing a dark hoodie and what looked like work boots, Carhartt style, the heavy kind, lace up. Average height. They were completely still, weight on their left foot, one hand resting on the railing, like they'd stopped mid-step and just stayed there. My brain ran through the obvious options immediately and automatically. Trespasser, someone messing with me, a worker who hadn't been notified of the night security shift. All of those felt thin, even as I was generating them. The road was locked. The clearing was not on any trail, but I ran through them anyway because they were available. Rule 3 said, if someone is already on the stairs, remain inside the booth. I stayed inside the booth. I watched. The figure didn't move for almost 2 minutes. I was counting, tapping my finger on my knee, 1 1,000, 2 1,000. And then they turned slightly. Not all the way. Maybe 20 degrees, just enough to make the turn visible, but not enough to bring their face into any kind of profile. The movement was slow and specific, like they were listening for something. Then the voice came. It carried across the clearing without being loud, the way sound sometimes travels in very still air. The phrasing was flat, conversational, not calling out. Hey, you're not supposed to be in there. My hand was already on the door push bar. I had the actual physical pressure of it against my palm, the cool steel of it, and I was maybe a pound of force away from pushing it open and saying something back. Something like, I work here, or you need to leave. And I stopped because of Rule 4. Not because I believed in Rule 4, just because the pressure of having memorized it was still there, and it stopped the impulse before I finished having it. I pulled my hand off the bar and stepped back. When I looked out the window again, the second landing was empty. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps retreating, no creak of the structure under shifting weight, nothing. The staircase was still and lit, and completely unoccupied. I stood at the window for a long time. Then I went to the logbook and wrote the entry. Hands not totally steady, the pen making my handwriting slightly worse than usual. I wrote it factually. Time, location, description of the figure, the words I heard, my decision not to respond, the absence of the figure when I looked again. I read it back, and it looked like the report of a person who was handling things fine, which I believed less each time I read it. I sat back down in the chair and stared at the stairs until sunrise. The next shift, there were boot prints at the base of the structure. I noticed them when I arrived, walking my opening check circuit. They were pressed into the soft ground at the bottom of the first step. The soil there was slightly damp, the impression clear. The tread pattern was a heavy work boot, deep lugs, the kind of print that has some weight behind it. There were 2 prints, both left feet, side by side, angled toward the first stair, like someone had been standing there deciding whether to go up. No prints approaching, no prints leaving. Just those 2 impressions in the soil at the base of the step, and the clean grass around them undisturbed. I walked the perimeter of the clearing. Nothing. I looked for tire tracks in the gravel of the access road. Nothing new. I went back to the booth and sat down and looked at the staircase, and the top landing seemed like the normal distance, and I was grateful for that. So I noted it mentally and looked away before I could look too long. I didn't ignore the 213 rule this time. I turned the lights off and sat in the dark for the full minute, and I didn't look at the stairs with any particular intention. I just let them be there at the edge of my vision, and they were fine. Just a staircase. When I turned the lights back on, I exhaled a breath I hadn't totally been aware I was holding. I wrote up the boot prints in the log. I radioed in on the check-in frequency and told whoever was on the other end, a man who gave his name as T, just the initial, that I'd found trace evidence of an unauthorized visitor and asked if I should file a formal incident report. T said, "You logged it?" I said yes. He said, "That's the report. Good work," and signed off. I sat with the radio in my hand after that, not totally sure what I'd expected him to say. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened on shift number 5, because I've told this account in my head many times, and the part I always get wrong is the sequence. The temptation is to put things in an order that makes them feel inevitable, building from one to the next, but that's not how it happened. What happened was, it was a slow night, and I was tired. My phone battery was at 11% because I'd forgotten to charge it, and I was sitting in my chair, with the logbook open in my lap, writing nothing in particular, just keeping my hand moving so I'd stay awake, when I heard something on the stairs. Something coming down, but slowly. One sound, then a pause that ran a beat too long, then another sound. The gaps between steps stretching and compressing without pattern. Heavy. The weight landing each time with a quality I couldn't name right away. Something off in the distribution of it, like each step was being worked out independently from the one before. I looked up. Something was on the second flight, coming down. I registered the shoes first, because they were at my eye level. Dark, lace up, the heavy kind. Then the legs. Then the rest of it. And here's where I run into the problem of description, because what I saw was a figure in dark clothing, proportioned like a person, carrying itself approximately the way a person carries itself. And if you had shown me a photograph of it, I think you could have argued it was just someone walking down a staircase. But the photograph wouldn't have shown you the way it moved. The shoes landed slightly off-center on each tread. Not dramatically, maybe an inch and a half from where you'd put your foot if you were walking down a staircase normally. Each time it hit a step, it took an extra fraction of a second to settle. Like it was working out the distribution each time fresh. Like it was running a small calculation. The intervals between steps didn't have the rhythm of someone being careful. They had the rhythm of something that had learned the sequence but hadn't fully internalized it yet. I didn't move. I was aware that I wasn't moving, and I couldn't fully account for why, whether it was the rules or something more basic. I watched it come down the last flight. It stepped off the bottom stair onto the concrete footing and stood there for a moment. And then it turned and started walking across the grass towards the booth. I heard the gravel when it hit the gravel apron around the booth. That specific crunch. Stones pressing under weight. I could see it through the window as it came closer. The ground lights now behind it. Its outline going from bright to dim as it moved out of the light zone. It walked like it knew where it was going. 12 feet out. 10 feet. The shape of it gaining definition through the glass. The hood up, the hands at its side, the posture slightly too upright. Like someone doing an impression of casual. It stopped just outside the door. 2 taps. Knuckles on the door panel, light and even. Same knock you'd use on a coworker's office door when you didn't want to startle them. Polite. Specific. I sat in the chair and looked at the door and felt something happen in my chest that I won't dramatize. My whole body had gone to a particular kind of still. And then I did the wrong thing. I don't have a good reason for it. I've tried to reconstruct the decision, and what I find is that the knock was so ordinary that it routed me around the rules. It went straight past the part of my brain that had been holding them and hit the part that was just a person in a booth hearing someone knock. My hand was on the push bar before I'd caught up with myself. I opened the door halfway. 6 inches of cold air came in. I looked at the thing standing outside my booth in the dark and said, "You're not supposed to be out here." The head tilted. Slow. A degree or two. The way a person tilts their head when they're considering something. I couldn't see the face inside the hood. What I could see was the shape of the jaw, the curve of a chin, the general structure of a face, but the interior of the hood stayed dark in a way that didn't entirely line up with how dark it was outside. It said, "You're not supposed to be out here." The words were mine, the exact cadence, the pause between supposed and to, the slight flatness I have when I'm trying to sound authoritative and not quite landing it. My voice, played back at me from inside a hood in a forest clearing at 3 a.m. I slammed the door. The push bar hit the frame and I put both hands on the door and stepped back and hit the chair with the back of my legs and went down sideways. And the thermos went off the table and hit the floor, and the lid wasn't on tight, and coffee spread across the boards in a dark fan shape, and I sat on the floor next to the tip chair and looked at the door. Silence. The generator hummed, the space heater ticked. I got up slowly and looked out the window. The clearing was empty. The staircase sat in its light, all 3 flights visible and still. No figure by the door, no figure crossing the grass, no shape moving at the tree line. I picked up the thermos and put it on the table, and stood there for a while with coffee soaking into the rubber sole of my boot. I checked the stairs before I left that morning. I told myself I was doing it because the procedure said to document physical evidence, and that was the only reason. The treads had marks on them, not random. They ran along the outer edge of several steps on the bottom flight, scuffed marks in the gray paint, the kind that come from something dragging across the edge of the step at an angle. Repeated, by the look of it. The paint was worn back to bare metal in places, and the edges of the marks were irregular. Not the clean line you'd get from a tool or a single deliberate scrape. Something had come across those edges many times. I crouched down and looked at the ground. Footprints in the soft earth leading from the base of the stairs towards the booth, and from the booth, a second set heading back towards the stairs. The prints going out were the heavy work boot tread I'd seen before. The prints coming back matched them exactly. The size, the depth, the wear pattern on the heel, the slight drag on the left toe. I knew those marks. I have a habit of not fully lifting my left foot when I'm tired, dragging the toe just slightly. I've worn through the left toe of 3 pairs of shoes that way. I stood up and looked down at my feet. Work boots, Wolverine brand, the pair I'd been wearing all week. I turned around and walked to the booth door and opened it and looked at the gravel apron immediately outside. My prints were there, coming out of the booth, crossing the gravel, then on the grass, then the path to the stairs, then back again. I hadn't walked that path tonight. I had driven in, done my opening circuit of the perimeter, and gone into the booth, and I had been in the booth since. I was sure of that, the way you're sure of things you haven't examined too closely. I looked at the prints for a while in the early morning light, then I went back inside. I wrote for a while before I thought to flip back and check the previous entries just to have the context of what I'd already logged. About 12 pages back from the current date, I found an entry written in my handwriting. The date was from before I was hired. The pen was the same pen I'd been using. Same black ink, same slight skip in the line that happens when the ball catches, and the handwriting was mine. The same slightly cramped cursive I use when I'm writing fast. The entry was 4 words. It learned faster this time. I turned back another page. Another entry, a different date, still before my hire date, still my handwriting. 2 sentences about the weather and the sound of something on the stairs, and a visual check that found nothing. I kept flipping. There were more. Not every page. They were scattered throughout the book, among entries in other hands. But they were there, spaced out over months, sometimes a line, sometimes a paragraph. All in my handwriting, all dated before I existed at this job. I sat there with the logbook open across my knees for a long time. The generator running outside, the space heater ticking, the coffee stain on the floor dried now to a brown outline. I didn't radio it in. I thought about calling Garrett and didn't do that either. Instead, I sat there until the sky started going light, and then I drove home and slept badly for 5 hours and lay in bed staring at the water stain on my ceiling that's been there since the apartment above me had a pipe burst 2 years ago. I went back. I keep telling myself there's a reason for that, something rational. The money, the contract, the non-disclosure agreement I barely read, and those things are true. But I also think I went back because I needed to know if it had happened the way I remembered it, and the only way to check was to go back and sit in that chair and look at the staircase and see if everything still held the same shape it had the night before. It had gotten worse. The booth was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. There was a new entry in the logbook. At the top of the current page, above the entries I'd made on the previous shift, written in my handwriting, timed at 4:47 a.m., which was after I'd already driven home. I hadn't written it. Responded to a knock, door opened, 6 seconds, significant progress, response time improving. I read it 3 times. I turned the page and checked the next entry, which was mine, definitely mine, written in the unsteady hand I'd had when I was on the floor next to the tip chair. I could see the place where the pen had pressed harder because my hand was shaking. I sat down in the chair and looked at the staircase. It looked completely normal. The ground lights on, the structure sitting in its clearing, the top landing at the right distance. I checked that specifically. The top landing looked right, the proportions were right, the distance was what it should be. I let out a slow breath. Then I noticed the dirt on the first step. Fresh, dark dirt on the diamond plate tread. The kind that transfers from wet ground when something walks across it. It was on the first step only. The concrete footing below it was clean. The ground around the footing was undisturbed. I looked at it for a long time from inside the booth. The dirt was on the top surface of the tread, which meant it had come from above. Someone or something carrying soil on their shoes and depositing it on the way down, not on the way up, which meant whatever had put it there had started higher up on the staircase. I tried to think about where you'd go from the top of a staircase that led nowhere and came up empty. I looked down at my own boots, the boots I'd been wearing. The left toe had fresh soil on it, dark and wet, pressed into the seam between the sole and the upper. I sat very still in the chair and tried to locate the last clear memory I had of being inside the booth, specifically the last moment I could account for without a gap. I found 4:30 something, a vague memory of the logbook, the lights on, the window, the staircase in the distance looking fine. And then there was a seam, and on the other side of it was morning, and I was in my apartment, and my boots were by the door with something dark on the left toe that I had looked at briefly and filed away as mud from the access road. I thought about that seam in my memory. It wasn't like forgetting. Forgetting has a texture, a gradual fade, a sense of things getting fainter as you approach the edge. This was clean. One thing, then another thing, and nothing in between. I thought about the logbook entry timed at 4:47, which was 30 minutes into what should have been my drive home. I thought about the second set of footprints I'd found, the ones leading away from the booth towards the stairs, both sets identical, mine. Outside the window, in the clearing, the staircase sat and did nothing, which was worse than if it had done something, which was the thing I kept finding out, that the stillness was worse, that the empty structure in its pool of ground light was the part that settled into your chest and took up residence there and didn't have a name you could use to get it out again. I opened the logbook. I uncapped the pen. I wrote the date and the time and on shift, and then I looked at the line below it for a long time. Then I wrote, first step, fresh soil transfer on tread, origin above, no prior activity logged this shift. I read it back. I checked it for accuracy. Everything was accurate. I looked up at the staircase, and I looked at the first step, and I looked at my boot, and I looked at the logbook, and at the pen in my hand, and somewhere in the middle of that circuit, something got very quiet inside me. The specific quiet of a conclusion you've been circling for a long time finally sitting down. I didn't write what I was thinking. I didn't know how to write it in a way that would fit into a logbook, in a way that could sit next to the weather observations and the hourly temperature readings and the no activity notations of whoever had sat in this chair before me. The thought wasn't the right shape for a log entry. What I thought was, the handwriting is mine, the boot prints are mine, the dirt is mine. And I don't know where I've been. Outside in the clearing, the staircase was completely still. I kept my eyes at the bottom step and did not look at the top landing, because Rule 5 said, if the top landing appears closer than it should be, stop looking at it. And I found, sitting there in the small booth with the generator humming, and the morning coming gray-white through the trees, that I had run out of reasons to treat the rules like they didn't mean anything. There was something on the first step, and I had no clean explanation for it, and the logbook had my handwriting in it from dates that hadn't happened yet for the person I thought I was, and the footprints in the soil around the structure matched the boots on my feet, and something that had knocked on my door with my own cadence and spoken with my own voice. I picked up the radio. I keyed it. I said, "This is the night post. I need to speak with Garrett." My voice sounded normal, which surprised me enough that I stopped for a second and tried to feel my way around inside myself to see what was happening in there. I found something. A kind of weight. Low and settled, without edges, taking up space in a way that hadn't been there before the fifth shift, and was there now and was going to stay there. The radio clicked. T's voice. "Garrett's not available. Log everything." I waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. The channel went back to static. I set the radio down on the table next to the logbook and the cold thermos and the pen with the slight skip in its ball, and I looked out the window at the staircase. The first step, specifically. The dirt on the first step, which was still there, which would still be there when whoever came after me arrived for their shift, if there was someone who came after me. I didn't actually know if there was. I'd never seen anyone at the handoff. I just drove in and they were gone, and I'd assumed there was a day shift somewhere, or that the structure didn't need eyes during daylight hours, or that the handoff just didn't overlap. I never thought to ask. I looked at the logbook, at my handwriting running down the page, at the date and the time and the words I'd written, and below them, the line I hadn't written yet. I thought about all the entries further back in the book, the scattered ones, months deep, my hand in unfamiliar ink that turned out to be the same ink, My pressure on the page that turned out to be my pressure. All that documentation of things I had supposedly witnessed, written by a version of me that had been sitting in this chair before I knew the chair existed. I learned faster this time. Present tense. Past action. Someone had been in a hurry. I looked at the staircase. I logged everything.